Okay, so I want to just let you know that the purpose of this, of Critical Connections, is to enhance and encourage critical writing in ceramics. And one notice that I want to say today, even though she's not here, is that Janet Koplos has just received the
Of course, you're
Distinguished
welcome.
Educator
Okay.
Award by the James Renwick Alliance. And she'll be featured in the symposium at the Smithsonian in May. So if you're interested in those details, they're online at www.jra.org. And our speaker today, this is our first studio visit. So I'm really excited about Lydia be our first studio person. And I think you're muted, Lydia.
Just broken clay.
I'm hoping that we can do a studio visit. And Lydia is also one who does some writing, right? Lydia?
I haven't in a while. No.
I thought you were writing for Studio Potter in the fall.
Oh goodness, how'd you learn about that?
I'm on the board.
Can't get anything past you. I can lie my way out of anything. Oh my God. It's like, I guess I'm gonna have to do it now that you called me out. I'm definitely gonna have to do the article now.
You are, that's right. That's exactly right. There's Judy Schwartz. Hi, Judy. Good to see you. And anyway, I sent out a link to Lydia's website, and I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time talking about her because I want her to talk about herself and give us the studio visit. So without further ado, here's Lydia Thompson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all. I wish I could give you some hugs, but I can give you air kisses. Everyone's doing well and you're enjoying the weather. It's a little chilly here today. I think we're all experiencing a cold front. The sun is shining pretty bright, but it's a little cold. And I think I'm just turning into a real Southerner. I've been moving south for the last 25 years and have not hit a cold in a good long time. Elaine, can you can I share my screen?
Yes, hold on. I should have done that.
You might have already, and then I'll get
Okay, you should be set.
Okay. Hopefully everyone is seeing my screen only.
Yes, I think so.
Not getting this in the back. I think that's just a Zoom link back there. So let me go here. There we go. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Elaine. I really appreciate you extending an invitation for me to present my work and being the first studio visit with Critical Connections and Ceramic series. It's interesting how all of these different opportunities are becoming available because of the pandemic and us learning how we can continue to share information with each other. So really appreciate that. I actually did this presentation for this Clay Art Center maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and have since kind of retooled it a little bit, revised a few things a little bit, but again, my website is there as well as my email. How do can I get rid of that? Okay, there we go. All right, so I thought, you know, I think what happened, and I'll just say what has happened to me, at least when the pandemic hit and then Black Lives Matter hit, it really enabled me to take a deep dive in terms of my own personal history, even deeper dive. These are some things that were on the surface, but it really gave me an opportunity to kind of put some things together in my own mind, and having, you know, been and being an older artist, like more mature, and being able to kind of look back, you know, when we're in grad school, we look at some things and life is running right in front of us and is still in front of us. But at the same time, there's some history and some gathering that has happened along the way. So my family lineage is to the left. That's my father, my grandmother, and my aunt. And my mother and father are in the center. And then my maternal grandparents are to the right. And I put those pictures in there because I wanted to kind of set the stage in terms of what the work is about and what my work has been about for a very long time. And it's really about migration. And in this case, these are the individuals who were part of that great migration north. My grandparents were, they're from Mississippi and Georgia, from very small towns, and they migrated to Columbus, Ohio in the early 1940s. My grandfather, who's pictured to the right, and his eldest son, they moved to Columbus, Ohio first, and they found jobs at the excuse me. Before I dive into that, this is a photograph of one of the houses that my grandparents rented. They rented a lot of houses. They were a large family of 8, and they kind of moved around trying to keep up with the rents. And so this was the last house they rented before they moved to Columbus, Ohio. So this is in Cairo, Georgia, not Cairo, Georgia. So to your left, you see the Buckeye Still, which is where my grandfather worked, and a lot of other men worked at this factory in Columbus, Ohio. This is on the south side of Columbus and on Parsons Avenue, Groveport area. This neighborhood where they settled was Stanball Elwood, and it was really 60 tract homes that were built by working class families, and they all migrated from the Deep South. And these are their houses. To the left is my uncle's house, and to the right are my grandparents' house. And what's interesting about this, in the light of all the things that have happened to African Americans throughout history, my grandparents, they really formed my value system that to live in this world freely, you must be responsible and contribute to your built environment. And for me, that has always been a part of knowing who I am in living in America is ownership. When I decided to go to grad school, I actually had an opportunity to, and we all know this, you have room in your schedule and you have time to really do and conduct research. What I found most interesting and really compelling for me, and what I drew from, was a lot of African-American women art writers. Zora Neale Hurston, who had kind of had a rebirth where their eyes were watching God. I remember I was at Alfred University, and I was just, like always, you're looking for one book, and instead you actually check out another because the book you want to check out is not there. And I saw this book. It was a really small book, and it hadn't been checked out. It had only been checked out once. And I said, what an interesting title, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And by Zora Neale Hurston, a very small book, a love story. And I decided to check it out, and just couldn't go to sleep. So stayed up all night reading this book. And she kind of pushed me into reading some of her other works, Mules and Men, and Baroon, which is about one of the last enslaved Africans that was living in the Alabama, Mississippi region, the Deep South. Alice Walker was another writer and still is. She just recently came out with a new book, and I'm looking forward to reading that as well. June Jordan, Toni Morrison, Gloria Naylor, and Sarah Lewis. The interesting thing about June Jordan is we had invited her to come to Alfred to speak about her work. She's a poet, and they invited me to the dinner, and it was really wonderful. And after dinner, I took a walk with her, and she kind of looked at me and she said, "What are you doing here? Little Black girl in Alfred, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm working." I'm working and gaining experience. But it was interesting because she's the same age as my mother, that she had that kind of maternal instinct to kind of ask me and be concerned about me living in this very small town that was predominantly white. She was a little concerned about me, and I thought that was interesting too. So that was my point of contact with June Jordan. And of course, Toni Morrison has always been one of my favorites, Gloria Naylor, and more recently, Sarah Lewis, who actually, she just came out with a new book, The Rise, Creativity, The Gift of Failure, and the Search for Making. So she's a faculty member at Harvard University. The artist's work that I was looking at is Winnie Owens Hart, Elizabeth Catlett, Betty Saar, Benny Andrews, Romare Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, and finally, John Biggers. And in this piece of John Biggers, titled Four Seasons, it really does speak to some of those icons and symbols that really epitomize the African-American communities. You know, you have the row house, the hair pick, and the railroad track. Some of the objects that have inspired me throughout the years have been drawn from African ceremonial, spiritual, and everyday objects that for me demonstrate the power of maker and the creativity. And some of these objects include the African hair pick. For me, it continues to be used to manage hairstyling, and the pick can be associated with the #1 hair tool to style an afro, which became a cultural symbol of Black ass kicking in the 1970s. And it signifies human capacity to transform the natural into cultural. In other words, the hair that grows naturally is transformed by the culture and serves as a symbol for women's contributions to society. The center image is the Boli, and it's from the Banama tribe in Mali. And it's a very powerful object that encompasses their spiritual and cosmological beliefs and all things made from clay and mud. So naturally, I would be attracted to that type of form. And I like that it's ambiguous. You're not quite sure what it is. It could be animal, it could be maybe an organ of some time. So it kind of falls into a lot of different objects that I see are kind of a living, breathing type of object. The next one is the heddle pulley, and it can be found in West African cultures, and it's an intricately carved out of wood that takes the form of a human, an animal, and it appears on a loom. And my apologies, I should have included a photograph of it so you could see how it is attached to the loom itself, a weaving loom. But as I'm using this as a reference in my work, it's the balancing of articles on the head. It promotes self-discipline, and it contributes significantly to one's spiritual well-being. This is a piece, and this is the only piece I'm going to show you from my graduate years. This is face jugs, and for me, it really is paying homage to enslaved people who were not allowed to use tombstones to mark their loved ones' graves. And so they would place these face jugs on the graves to scare away the devil so that the deceased would make an uninterrupted journey to the heavens. And this actually, when I look back at some of my work, as I know that most of us do, we can kind of see a correlation, and we can see how it connects to even the work that we're doing today. So it was really great to hold on to some of these slides. And of course, I'm trying to convert some of my slides into the digital, and I see that the resolution has certainly changed because they've been sitting in boxes all these years. I was definitely interested in going to West Africa. I really, really wanted to explore some of the things that I was feeling about in my heart, about a place that I knew that my ancestry had began there. So I decided that I would write a proposal and go to Nigeria. And I was funded through the Fulbright Hayes grant. And my research was to study traditional adobe architecture. And I immediately saw these granaries, and for me, they spoke to me as these large vessels. And I was fortunate to spend the majority of my time learning how to build these forms and working outside with some of the construction workers. So it was really wonderful. And I also had an opportunity to travel throughout Nigeria. At the time, the borders were closed to Ghana and Cameroon, so I was unable to leave the country, but I certainly gained a wealth of information just traveling with inside the country. And this is me to the right, well, both left and right. And it's great because it's the same thing as coil building. It's building with tubular bricks made out of adobe. So it was a really great opportunity to really just focus on working with your hands and working with people. So this is a very community driven type of work I was doing. And this is one of the other granaries that I finished. So speaking of the heddle pulley, this is kind of the types of imagery that I was making that referenced the heddle pulley. And, you know, it kind of helped me with my stream of consciousness of a character to tell stories about people that I either met or I read about. And this piece to your left is titled The Beheading of Saint Garnet Paul Johnson. And the one to your right is titled Black Fields. The one to the left, I did a series of these heads that were really these broad shoulders, kind of abstract, not overly representational, but really showing kind of the pain of that particular person that I was emulating or portraying. And so this was a true story where we were mourning the tragic death of on July 25th in 1997. And at the time I was living in Virginia, of an African-American ex-Marine. And he was beheaded and set ablaze by two white men after a party got out of hand at Grayson County, Virginia. And although his murderers were tried, found guilty and jailed, the case was not prosecuted under the US government certified hate crime law that could possibly have imposed a harsher sentence. And so I always want the pieces to be somewhat approachable, somewhat abstract, but I want to also emulate a little bit of pain of whatever that situation is. So it's kind of scary, it's kind of ghostly, the eyes are hollowed out, the mouth is open. There's something a little whimsical about this piece because I'm sure at the time the murderers didn't think that it was anything serious that they had done. And so every now and then, occasionally, those types of things, they hit home for me and it's very hurtful and I have to respond to them in my own way. This piece is entitled, let's see if I can find this, The Growth Beneath It. So what starts to happen with these heddle pulleys is, this is still a heddle pulley, but what starts to happen is I'm stretching the torso. What I found is an interesting connection with a lot of the sneaker wear, these new designs and using these really bright colors. The piece to the left is If You Come With Me, and the piece to the right is The Past of Someone Else. These are the Carrier series. This piece to the left is titled Encaged. The one to the right is Sweet Coals. In the process of, especially the one to the right, what was I actually went to the grocery store and found a couple of sweet potatoes, and I made a mold out of them, a two-part mold, and just cast them. And they just, to me, there's no reason to resculpt these. They were already there for me. And so these really talk about bringing some type of commodity that might be close to your home or your value system within your community. The encaged piece, on the other hand, is really talking about, even though you're free, you're still trapped. And so that's why the cage is open around in a circular fashion, but you're also entrapped in what your old feelings and some of the baggage you bring forward from your culture. This piece is titled Black Island, Haiti. And this was probably I want to say it's been over 20 years, but there was a moment when Haiti was having some horrific ecological problems, and they were actually cutting down their trees. When they cut the trees down, the soil started to fall into the ocean. And this is me thinking of a reef that is formed around this island that has no resources anymore. And so that's why there's a black disc inside of that. When I started, I've always worked with collage, but when I started having children, I only have two, but in working full time, I had to figure out a way to continue making my work. And I couldn't do clay. We all know that if you roll a slab out, and even though you wrap it up really tightly, that, you know, it's going to dry out eventually. And I just couldn't get back to the clay like I wanted to. And to me, at the end of the day, regardless if we are working in clay as our primary medium, we are artists first. We're creators, creatives first. And for me, it was just essential that I keep my hands working. And so I started this working with a lot of collages, a lot of paper. And sometimes I would travel. When I had to stay overnight, I would have a small suitcase that had foam core in it, a self-healing mat, and different types of papers and glue. And when I would go to a high school and I would come home or go back to the hotel, I would simply just sit down and make these works. So at the time, I think I ended up making probably 300 of these masks, and I was only selling them for $150, $200, $300. So they sold really quickly, which is unfortunate, but that's what we do sometimes, right? This is these are hair picks. And so you can remember when I talked about the hair pick as well as the heddle pulleys. So this is where this work is coming from. And I'm really proud of this work. This work is really important in terms of my development as an artist. And so it really speaks to what women do. They organize, they separate, they nurture, and that's what a hair pick does, not only to the scalp, but even a rake with the earth. It's opening up the earth so things can grow. So that's what this series of work is about. And then, of course, I continued working on these through some architectural forms. If you remember the Adobe architecture pieces, where some of them were on stilts. So that's what I'm still interested in that. This is a recent piece. This piece is and two other heads, large heads, they're called watchers. They are going to be in the Mint Museum coming up in May. And just wanted to show the process here. I start with a line drawing, and then that's my pattern for how I cut the paper out. But actually what I'm working on, which is really fantastic, is insulation board. So all of that large piece, it's about 45 inches high. It's made out of insulation board, and I just use various glues to make sure that the paper adheres to the surface. So you can see the side, how I built it up. So it's really, really great to work in between the paperwork and then also the ceramics. So getting back a little bit to some of those things, some of those images and architecture that I saw deteriorating in the landscape, and this was, again, this is back in 1984 or 85 when I was traveling through Nigeria. But how that work made such an impression, those images made such an impression on me that they now are coming to the forefront again. I was also curious too to see how architecture, how structures start to break down in a particular environment. And they actually go through the same kind of process. In addition to that, I was looking at Ndinkwa symbols. These are from West Africa as well, and showing how symbols, even though you might have the same symbol, how they're used differently, and they mean different things depending on what culture you're in. So here, here, this is a symbol of fortitude, but you can see the two X where it kind of creates an X there, ability to confront and manage change. And here, there's a little bit of a connection with that, but when you see these on buildings, this means the community that these are dangerous conditions and the structure should be abandoned. So that's what those are about. This structure is actually from Charleston, South Carolina. These two houses are in my neighborhood. The one to the left is my father's next door neighbor's house. The one on your right is a building in my mother's neighborhood. So this is what's happening. Even though people are continuing to live their life, the other parts of life are showing that they're dying and deteriorating. This pic is showing that to your left is a house in Cairo when I went for a family reunion there. This is in a neighborhood to your left in the 2000s. And the photograph you see to your right, that's actually in Nigeria. So the reason why I put those two together is to not only show that history of how houses are designed and made in these poor communities, how it's just a bare essential of this kind of pitch roof that's very low, kind of a single level structure. But again, these are two different parts of the world, but you can see the connection between the two. So here is my uncle and my grandfather's house. They are both deceased. If you see, that's the same houses to the right. And you can see how the driveway kind of divides the yards. But again, you can see how one is very lively and wonderful and beautiful, and then how the other one has started to change over time. So my most recent work, I'm examining working class family homes. And over time, like I had mentioned before, they're starting to deteriorate, right? And it's for a number of reasons that these things are starting to happen. Is unemployment, is on the rise, the loss of income, the infiltration of drugs, increase in crime that has led to eviction and abandoned homes. I feel these houses, they contain multiple stories about communities that have evolved and changed over time. And the contents of the house is what I'm really interested in at this moment too. Not only the structure itself showing that deterioration, that process, but I'm interested in the contents of the house and what's left behind. And as we start moving through some of these images, I have used rubble to infuse them, and the rubble has been fused together with glaze. And the broken shards, for me, they have multiple meanings that include, memories of loss and family and shattered dreams, and trying to capture that spirit of those things that hopefully will inform how we interact with each other in the future. I might also see the connection that the breakage of fire ceramics reminds me so much of the kill holes that were used in the Membres pottery, which served as a conduit to the afterlife. These figurines in my grandmother's house served as an example of duality of culture through these historical decorative ceramic objects. And I never even thought about these objects as being decorative objects. And my main source of inspiration for this work is my grandmother. I spent a lot of time with my paternal grandmother. She was a collector in her own right, mostly of 19th century Eurocentric figurines. They were replicas, of course, and she would purchase these at Salvation Army, and she would place them on the top of end tables and side tables. And my grandmother was a domestic, so I really think she formed her decor and her sense of design from working in those houses. This piece is entitled Occupy Japan by Way of Sims in Odessa. Sims were some neighbors of ours, and that's the only Black family that I knew that traveled anywhere outside of Columbus, Ohio. They would go to Egypt, and they would go to California. They would go to, they would see the Grand Canyon. So all these things that you would read about and see about, that's what they were doing. And I thought that was just remarkable because we grew up in a working class neighborhood. Odessa is my mother, and so she also collected a fair amount of her own objects and things, and she also inherited some of these things from the Sims. So this piece you see to your left, this little figurine you see up there, and the one that's sitting outside of, that looks like it's sitting outside of the building. This was on the bottom of some of those wares, it was stamped Occupy Japan. And so when during the post-World War II, when we occupied Japan, even though we were there in the factories, we had to make sure that those wares were stamped Occupy Japan before they were shipped back to the United States. And so when I think about this, I think about all the crafts objects that may have been made by other cultures, that works that were shipped to other places in the world, that most of the time those objects were not really didn't reflect the indigenous cultures of the makers. They were really about something else, the way other people lived. And so that's why I put that little doll on there, the figurine with the holding the doll, as if she doesn't have a care in the world. So it's really showing a different aspect or side of culture, different cultures. This one, there's two pieces. This one is commodity houses, and you can see the little figurines inside of that. And again, my grandmother, she didn't discriminate. She collected all kinds of figurines, mostly of people, but not so much of animals or anything. And they were from different cultures. So she would have Asian figurines, she would have European figurines. But one thing that my grandmother never collected was Black memorabilia, because those were all very negative. And I think collecting Black memorabilia didn't become popular until the 1980s. This is another commodity house. Again, it's talking about the factory workers. And you can see that little head there for those of you who went to China that time within Sika. I actually found that little head at one of the kiln sites. And so these things, they just keep, unveiling themselves to us. And I just take them and put them in the work, infuse them into the work. These little houses I made at Adulta when I was in Canada, and I brought these small houses back. So these houses have had a long lifespan to them. I made the house, the structure itself, back in 2012 when I was there for a summer residency.
Lydia, we have about 5 more minutes, and then we need to take time for discussion.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll just kind of run through these then. I'm so sorry about that. My apologies. So this is another one of the pieces. So you have a sense of what the work is about, since I've really put together a really, since I gave you an explanation, a really good description. This piece is called Unequivocal Circumstances. And this image is just showing you how those pieces, how when I break them and subconsciously, there were some other things that were happening in the United States with the removal of Confederate statues. Another piece, Surrender. You can see how those are infused too into the work. Another piece here, Surface. And again, these are some of my grandmother's pieces. And, when I fired them at different temperatures, the glazes and the textures changed of the glaze when I fired them at different temperatures. This piece was actually at Sika. For those of you who might have seen it in the show, Belonging. Combination of things happening here, decals, rubble. These are some reclaimed plates, repurposed plates that I fired my own decals on there. So you can see that building a narrative around enslaved, coming from from West Africa, going through the Atlantic over to the United States. And these are some details. And then these are the last two pieces. This is really speaking about Breonna Taylor. Again, when I do utilize or incorporate some of the social justice things that are happening, it oftentimes takes more of a kind of a subtle approach to it, because I want people to really engage in the work and not be hit over the head with it, but it's a time of contemplation. So here, this is a portrait of her. And again, using that house structure and understanding that just these are hypothetical spaces in which both her and Sandra Bland were killed in, that they passed away, that they're really not safe split spaces, that they really are, about vulnerability. So these are just some of the textures of the walls of those pieces. And this is, I think this might be the final slide. These are some references of the work that references for that body of work. This is just a list of some of the books and things that I was reading at the time. There's a couple of podcasts in there, and it's just really helpful. I mean, for me, this work was really a part of a research and really taking a deep dive and really focusing on my own background versus pulling from other cultures. Okay.
Very good.
Okay. And my apologies for.
No, you're fine. You're fine. It's just that we always want to be able to ask questions, and this is a kind of a vocal group, so we want to be able to get right at it. And I'm so impressed. I saw the pieces at NCECA, and your surfaces and the richness of the combinations of things make they just bring another layer to all of your content. I was interested in the use of the wheels as a support of your migration thinking, and the ways in which some were had the mobility, and then the couple of figures that you showed were really rooted and grounded. And so as a writer, I would be interested in talking about that. But first, before I even ask you to address that, Joe Loria posted a question on the chat. And her question is, because the context of your pieces, especially the series of dilapidated houses that refer to politics and policy of property and poverty, do you advocate that your artwork be interpreted when on display with extended label text to explain the concepts, or do you prefer that the visitor interpret the piece without any commentary? So if the piece stand on its own.
Yeah, I think depending on where the work is being displayed or exhibited, I think it helps, because even as people walk through a museum, text is really important. And when you read about something from a different culture, it kind of puts it in its place, right? And even though this is, a lot of these pieces, the houses that I'm looking at are from urban environments, they are also happening throughout the rural community as well. And I think we're all at that stage in our life where we're losing people, and we're trying to make these decisions about what to do. And we're trying to hold on to structure in terms of holding on to the past. And so it's really hard to let go sometimes. Like, you see a house and all it needs is one little push. And it's almost like, well, I'm not going to be the one to do it. I'm not going to do it. And so it just sits there abandoned. So what people normally do is they kind of understand the value, but they may not have They might not have the resources, so they board it up, right? And so I think text is always important, but I think anybody could go to the work and they could have their own narrative about that. They can have a memory that either they saw this house in passing, traveling somewhere, and that house might be, maybe they couldn't make the farm work. Like they just couldn't make it work. They couldn't pull enough together. Maybe there weren't enough hands. Maybe the family, the mother couldn't produce enough children, because we often know we're in these farm communities that it's great to have children, so they can work the land. So it might be that. If you're moving into an urban environment, it could be white flight. It could be now that the African Americans have moved into this neighborhood and, loss of jobs. Maybe there's some other things that kind of happen as that community was transitioning. So I think sometimes it's great to let people form their own narrative. The main thing is and I think we all want this, is for when you're walking through a space and you might kind of quickly pass it or gradually pass it, but then you come back and you like, wait a minute, I need to look at this again. And then it captures your attention, and then maybe you read you read the text. But I don't think I think it's important now, especially where I am, because we're trying to educate people. And I think text helps build the narrative and the story explanation.
Good. Rita Donham had a comment, said, it's wonderful to see Lydia using all her personal cultural experiences and ancestors' backgrounds in her work. Every piece of her work resonates culture, either embracing it or opposing it. Is it possible to create artwork without a reflection on your own cultures? And if one does, is the work lacking? You want to comment on that?
Well, I think through my culture, when we say culture, culture is very broad. And, within a culture, there are many subcultures. And I always tell students, no matter where you go, you need to find your people. And people are not people that might look like you, but they think like you. And so when I think all of our work, no matter what we make, it is about our culture. It's about our experience. So, you have a ceramic culture, you have a women's culture, you might have a culture within a city or a neighborhood. And so, yeah, I don't know if I care to make work that's not about my culture.
Yeah.
And because I think everything I do is about my culture and other people's culture. It's about American culture. It's about, like the housing crisis. That doesn't just impact me or African Americans, it impacts everybody. And when one person loses, we all lose. And so, or when people are displaced, that impacts everybody. And so these are things that impact everybody. It's just all I can speak from is from what I am and who I am in my own experiences.
I find it interesting that the images that you showed of deterioration, when translated into ceramic work, reflect a richness in the surface that I find so engaging and in opposition to that deterioration, but I understand the depiction of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that is actually what I was going for. I think it's terrible what's happening in Ukraine. When I look at those buildings, of what a bomb can do, it can just peel away like paint or anything. And that's really beautiful. But it's beautiful because something ugly has happened, something really, demonic. I call that demonic when you go and you throw bombs on people, you bomb a community. And so, I think I don't want the work to be that. I want it to be a natural, gradual deterioration of what should I say? What can I go through? And I think it's experiencing loss. I think those are some things that we need to think about. But how can I use the ceramics? How can I reclaim the ceramics into something that would be worthy of sharing with others?
Yeah. And Robert Milnes has a question. maybe it's a comment. The concept of contained space seems to resonate in your work in terms of both ceramic history and larger architectural forms. They also appear to be focused on personal spaces and the passage of time and ownership.
Yeah.
Any
Yes.
comment there?
Yeah. I think part of that for me is I've moved several times, as I'm sure most of you have, and no matter how much you try to protect something, you open the box and it's broke. And so it's a matter of the whole, it's kind of a combination of things. It's like, I know we've said this to our students, it'll last forever until it breaks, right? Like once it breaks, it's it, but it'll last forever. And I kind of like that concept. And I was going, it's kind of a little bit of a riff of my grandmother in a different way. Even when she would find these objects, she would oftentimes like take a hand off of something else and then attach it. So it wasn't so much that the hands had to match. I'm just putting a hand back where it should be, and I thought, okay, that's an okay thing to do. But I just thought it was interesting in terms of how she wanted to save something. She was always interested in saving something. And like we want to save people, we always want to save people. But I think about that. I think about how much can I bring with me each time? And every time I move, I always lose something, either by choice or not. And I think it's good I want to leave the walls open so people can see what's inside. That's important without having to walk in and that red X that you see on the buildings that the fire marshal puts on these buildings, you can actually see what's in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of a mystery, I think, to it, to kind of put things together. When you see those shards together, like there's a bit of a investigation that you might have to do.
Mm-hmm. Jo Shea has her hand up.
Hi there. First of all, thank you so much. I really enjoyed seeing your work and hearing your work. And I guess this is kind of a comment, but what hit me more than it ever has is the value of seeing the images at the beginning. And I was thinking, if I just read your biography and maybe your artist statement, without those images, it wouldn't have been as rich or as visual or a really kind of instantly connectable. And so that just really struck me more than it has, I think, for anyone I've heard about. So I just think there was a real value to sharing those images besides the words. So it's kind of the opposite of the whatever kind of explanatory text might be along with your pieces. This was the image along with the text. So thank you so much. It was just really, really fantastic. And I personally always loved petals when I first learned what they are, because when you first look at them, at least from my background, it's like, what is that? What does it do? How do they use it? And so I agree with you. They're just very, very fascinating objects. So I really enjoyed seeing that, I guess, kind of a triptych of objects that were inspirational. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Jo, are you talking about when you say the images, are you talking about the family photos? Or are you talking about the structures, the
both?
Okay.
Both the family photos that kind of set the scene, and then also if I just read, oh, you got a Fulbright and you went to wherever, I would never have kind of had the richness of experience that we got with you showing those images of what you saw and yourself.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
As writers, how do we delve into that? Let's say that we're asked to go in and write an article or a review about an exhibition where we aren't privy to that background. Where do we go with that? And how can we, we'd have to really look into the background of the artist in order to be able to, and possibly interview the artist. But comments on that from some of you who are writers or.
I was just at, the Kemper has a marvelous show of chalk drawings about fairy tales, and they did not have one didactic, and it has to do with Grimm's. And I've said, what's going on here? And they said, well, we want you to think for yourself. I thought it was, how can I get into this stuff I don't know about? And then I noticed they have a Black artist show at the Nelson, and they let all of the, Stephanie Knapp, the curator, said she didn't think she could write about it. She has all of the artists wrote their own didactics. I thought it was pretty successful, actually. But I keep seeing this over. I think the new thing is to not do anything. It looks lazy to me.
Well, if I could just comment, I think the houses to me are the most generic of the work. I think, and what I mean by that is that many people could come to that work and kind of put the puzzle together. They've seen that before. They've seen these things somewhere. They've experienced pain and, you know, thinking about what pain might look like. Pain is shattered. Pain is, you break a plate. It might be accidental or, you know, just using some of those things from their own experience together. I mean, when when you see a bulldozer come in, you know, that could be the metaphor, you know, when a bulldozer goes through a wall. There's either people have lost housing or things are transitioning. So it's all of those kinds of things, you know. I'm not so much interested in trying to capture all the reasons why buildings are deteriorating. I'm interested in, or why they're crumbling. Like, I'm gonna use the Ukraine again. I'm not so much interested in that because I just wouldn't want to just put a crumble building out there and say, oh yeah, this is about the bombing in Ukraine. No, it's, you need to be sensitive to those things. And I think for me, this work is, I'm sensitive to it because of, I've been thinking about it a long time, and I've taken some ownership in terms of my family is changing. You know, my grandparents are deceased. The houses have changed. You know, these environments have changed. So I can somewhat speak from experience, even though the houses haven't crumbled in on themselves. But that the way the transition has crumbled in on itself. So that's me showing a visualization of what has happened dealing with family sometimes, and those things associated with objects that are owned by family. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's lazy. I don't know if it's a new genre that we're in where maybe writers, we don't need that. But I love it when people write about my work because I want to see what they see. I want to know what they see, you know, and if I miss the mark, sometimes I get it. Like I had a former student come in and her partner was with her. And I mean, those two were nailing everything I did. I was like shaking my head. Yeah, you got it, you know? And I know that doesn't always happen. And I don't want it to happen too quickly. I want people to contemplate and think about it a little bit. I want them to come back and look at the work and, you know, why are they looking at the work? Is it scale? Is it placement? Is it what's on the surface, how active the surface is? Maybe this, in some places it needs to be calm. You know, there needs to be a quiet place in the work sometimes. So, yeah.
And let's see, Linda said, I want to get into the work. Didactics help. Sometimes you learn something about your work you weren't thinking of, just like what you just said. That, yeah. And Rita said, your work is the most inspiring art I've seen in a long time, just brilliant. And so was your presentation. Thank you for exposing your soul in your art.
Gonna make me cry.
Yeah. I find it, and I would love to have you comment on that I mentioned earlier on with the wheels, the mobility, and then the pieces that are rooted, the figures that are firmly rooted.
Yeah, well, let's take the carriers first, and you can see how, like, sometimes I would use a wheel that looked a little more mechanical and that it was made out of wood versus ones that were sculpted from clay. And uh and then there, of course, the tracks, the houses that are on kind of these pallets. So I didn't show a couple of houses that were actually on wheels because I think my narrative changed a little bit, and I think I was just putting them on wheels because that's what I had done with the carriers. But I think the reason why there's not a hook on either side of them, and what's interesting about the Buckeye Steel, where my grandfather worked and some of my uncles, is that that's what they would make. They would make those connectors for the trains. And for me, it was kind of like not having those. They were kind of idling, they were kind of just, they could go either way. You could go backwards, you could be forwards, and different things could pull you either way. And so, but there was always an opportunity to move and to be, to move. That's why they were on wheels, and to transition. But the ones that are more rooted, it really speaks about, I think it's just a way I was structuring them. I didn't see them as objects that were moving. I didn't see them as animated objects. And so for me, it just made sense to build those so they were more kind of sturdy on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So that I was really interested in that so much. But also think about the hair pick, same thing, the opening architecture.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why those never really came off the table at any point.
No, they didn't. But I also looked at those projections in the hair pick. Many of them were quite animated.
Wheels and
No, the hair picks.
Oh, the hair picks.
Hair picks. I mean, they were almost like legs ready to be in motion.
Right.
The visual weight was high, and these projections almost acted like as legs.
Yeah, well, that's a great metaphor. When I was making those pics or thinking about the pics, I was thinking about how they set in the woman's hair. A lot of in cultures, they use these very ornate hair picks that kind of like crowned, crown for women. And so I wanted them to be like that. Like there's that one one of the pics that has her hands on her head, and it's just that moment that we all are in, where we just are frustrated, we're tired, we don't know what to do. But yeah, they did start to become a little more animated, like you said. You could feel that, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Those were great because when you work in different medium, like I don't know if you all dream about your work, and I dream about my work, and I think, oh man, this would be great if I could make this thing 10 feet tall. It's like, really? Do you really want to make that 10 feet tall? And I actually do. It's just, what do you do? Where does it go? Where's the place for that? I don't want to just build something large just to build it large. To me, when it starts getting to that level, it needs to be in a community somewhere. Yeah. Like I built these pieces. I don't know if you can see that piece right there. That's like I built that during the pandemic just to do it, just to make it, to say, okay, I did it. So it's probably about, well, it's not that tall, about 5 feet tall. But there's nowhere to put it except in that corner. And so I mean, I'd like to do more, but I want to build, when I start building at that scale, I want to build more with the purpose in terms of where this piece is going to land, where it's going to live.
Yeah. And going back to those pieces that were on wheels, I felt that the potential mobility gave them hope.
Yes.
Gave it a positive, I don't know, motivation or something for change, and there was hope involved in that.
Right.
Yeah,
And it's giving you an opportunity to stress the importance of your culture and bring it forward with you and not to lose that. So it's
right.
always, yeah, absolutely.
And Robert had another question. Does the use of insulation board in your work arise from architecture? Is that a relation to your other works?
Well, Robert, in actuality, I was using foam board, like for those pics that you see there, those pics are, and all that, the masks and all of that, that was on foam board and that's, you know, small scale. And I think the largest of the pics was 18 by 33. And so in order for me to envision working larger, the insulation was just another material that was very similar to working in foam board. So it just gave me an opportunity to work larger without the foam board, you know, bending and twisting. Because
Right.
sometimes when you use certain glues on foam board, it causes it to curl a little bit. But the insulation board is great. It's lightweight. I'm
Sure.
not sure what's going to happen to it over time, but I've tried to be extremely careful in terms of what kind of glues and adhesives that I use for the
Yeah.
board.
Be careful with the glues. I used some construction glue on it, and it aided away in a very interesting way.
Yeah, I'm using the PVA. So I use PVA, I use wood glue.
Yeah.
And I sometimes will use the Yes glue. The problem with Yes glue is if you put too much water in, it'll cause your paper to curl.
Right.
And so, you know, again, working with different materials, you learn new things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the depth of the foam board that you were using, what is that thickness? I'm trying to see how far out the faces project.
I actually, the foam, excuse me, the insulation board is usually about 2 inches.
Yeah.
And I'll just cut. And so it might protrude out to about 4.5.
Yeah, cool. That's
Yeah.
what I thought. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, and so far, you know, and you know, when you're working with different materials, you have to make sure that you make the work in time so it's not deteriorating before you get it to the gallery. So I think it's good. It's the work has been sitting there for a while, so I think it's good. Yeah.
I'm saving the chat and I'll send it to you, Lydia, but there were some really nice comments here
Okay.
about your presentation. And I want to say that what you did for me was to make me start wanting to just make a list of the qualities of your work. You made me want to write. And you also made me want to go to the studio. So
Yeah.
So I don't think it gets any better than that. I really appreciate you being here with us. And are there any other comments or questions for Lydia?
Just thank you, Lydia. It
Yeah,
was
Anna, it's good to see you again.
great to see you. I was
Yeah.
very excited when I heard you were going to do this. And
Yeah,
I was
very
at the
cool.
Clay Centers one, and I mentioned to Elaine how wonderful you were in the studio there. So I'm happy to see this. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
And
really
Janet Koplos is here. Janet, don't leave. Earlier, before you got here, I just mentioned your award as Distinguished Educator of the Renwick. We're really proud of that.
Yay.
So congratulations. Wish I could be at the event.
Well, congratulations, Janet. One thing that I would want to say for all of you who have been in the trenches of art administration and that you have made it through alive and well, and you're back in your studio, I just want to say kudos to you. You give me hope. I did step down. I was the chair for one term here, and I just thought it was time. I mean, I had built my experience in administration working at several institutions. And I just think sometimes you know when it's time to make a move and to pivot. And last year was my time, you know.
Congratulations.
I think I made a very great and wise decision. I still have a lot of energy. I'm enjoying what I'm making.
Good.
I like that I'm getting a response to the work more than anything, just that people are connecting with the work. And I think that's what we want, you know.
That's what we strive for. Yeah.
Yeah, I try my students
Yeah.
sometimes say, "Oh, I just made this for myself." I said, "No, yes, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you are also making because you want to share your work with a larger audience."
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed seeing the history of your work, like the graduate work, and then moving forward from there. That was great.
Great.
Well, thank you all, and Elaine, thanks for reaching out to me. And
Yes. It's
course,
always
hand
good
up
to
always.
see you. Yeah. And I want to mention that next month will be May 19th. We'll be back to our regular time slot at 4 p.m. US Eastern Time. And in her article in Garland, Dee Wood is here today to see what this is all about, but she'll be presenting on her article in Garland, where she argues for the importance of craft writing by makers. I will send that article out to everyone on the list, so you'll be able to read it ahead of time and come prepared to listen and talk about that. So thank you for coming today, Dee. I appreciate that. You're muted.
I just said thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Dee is in Canada and on Eastern Time as well. So
Okay, great.
anyway, okay, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Great
everyone.
presentation, great
So
meeting.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for inviting me.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.